All right, and now the part that you all have been waiting for, which is today's webinar. The title is Tree Equity, Enacting Change in American Cities, and our guest, of course, is Jad Daley. And I'm going to introduce him in just a moment. The event is going to last around 75 minutes. Jad is going to talk for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll hear again briefly from Laura, and then we're going to get to the Q&A. And just to let all of you know, please drop your Q&A not into the chat, although we welcome conversation in the chat. And if you want to drop where you're joining us from, we also really like to see that. But if you have a question for Jad, you can go ahead and drop it into the Q&A function. And then at the end of the webinar, we will try to get to as many questions as we can. We are also offering, this webinar is eligible for an hour of CFE credit from the Society of American Foresters. And the way you can get that credit is by sending us an email to education@foresthistorysociety.org. And please just put CFE into the subject line, and we'll put that into the chat as well. So now let me introduce our distinguished speaker, Jad Daley. Jad is the president and CEO of American Forests. He is the 40th president and chief executive officer. And this is, as we mentioned at the top, the oldest conservation organization in the nation. Under Jad's leadership, American Forests has launched partnerships to tackle climate change and social inequity in cities across the United States. He also serves as the co-chair of the Forest Climate Working Group, which he co-founded in 2007, and sits on the boards of the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, North American Forest Partnership, and Nature for Climate. Jad, thank you so much for joining us. I'm thrilled to have you. And as are the people on our webinar, we're very grateful to you. Please go ahead.
Tania, thanks so much for the chance to join you today. And thanks for the partnership between American Forests and the Forest History Society. You all keeping our history safe and curating it has been such a gift. And I'm going to actually share that gift with everyone today because I've really been mining. We actually very regularly mine our history. I mean, a lot of the journey at American Forests over the last 5 or 6 years and charting our way forward for our next 150 years. We're having the 150th birthday next year. And so thinking about the next 150 years and what would we need to do now has been greatly informed by our history. And you all have, given us such a gift to be able to have that history well cared for, well curated, and to really learn from it efficiently, as well as the broader history of the forest community. So I've really tried to anchor my reflections on where we are today in a broader historical orientation, and what are some of those lessons learned from the past that are informing how we're doing the work today. So first of all, if you feel like it's a bait and switch and said, wait, where's the tree equity headline? I actually want to take a step even farther back. We are going to talk about tree equity in cities and an incredibly exciting movement here in the United States and now including that's now rippling out globally. But I wanted to actually start by kind of just stepping back. These are challenging times, as Tania alluded to, and I think it's really easy to let our fears kind of overwhelm our confidence and our hope and our ability to think strategically going forward. And so I wanted to just reflect on a few really broad-based things that we have anchored ourselves around at American Forests in how we're trying to be a service leader for the forest movement. And the first is that we have an incredibly proud history across political lines and across other boundaries of really acting like one nation under trees, of taking care of our forests, investing in our forests together collaboratively. And I think we can feel really proud of that, and we can really lean on that as we go forward and deal with some of the very real divisions that have emerged in our country, and know that trees and forests and on our shared love of them and caring for them is one of those things that can actually help bring us back together. That relationship that we have with forests is first and foremost born out of love. I mean, our nation is endowed with such an incredible richness of forest resources, from our cities to our stunning natural areas, to the resources. In fact, we built our country significantly out of our forests. So, there's just so much that we all gain together and have always understood as part of our common heritage. But it's also been a history of loss too. That our organization was really born in 1875 out of a recognition that we weren't taking care of that resource, and that we had to respond to, again, whether it was in our cities or whether it was in our large landscapes, that we weren't we didn't have the right structures, the right collaboration, the right understanding to take care of that resource. And so a lot of our history has been about thinking, what's the challenge of this moment in caring for that resource? And what do we need to do differently together to care for it? And I want to acknowledge within that history of loss, a really profound history of loss for Indigenous communities in America. And our organization is working really hard right now to better understand the fullness of that history, to grapple with that, to atone for that, and to build solutions around remedying some of those past extreme harms and even the genocides that have been committed against Indigenous peoples in our country, and with forest land loss being a real significant part of that. So I just want to acknowledge that it's a really important theme that we have to think about in all the things that we're doing going forward. And you know, I'm happy to say throughout this history, there are a lot of success stories. Again, the Ninth American or the Second American Forest Congress that, you know, they helped birth the U.S. Forest Service. On our 100th birthday, you know, the incredible, in 1975, the incredible bipartisan collaboration of that was going on at the time, including, for example, birthing the National Forest Management Act, and right through today, the way that, for example, the U.S. Forest Service is partnering so creatively with organizations like our own. So that we've just seen throughout history that when we approach our forest the right way, we can create really profound solutions together. We have a great track record. So I want to talk about a couple of ways in which I feel like right now that strength is coming to the fore, and that we need to keep building on. And the first is a movement that has emerged over the last few years to acknowledge the tree inequities in our cities, and to work towards tree equity in our cities as a profound solution for our communities. And so I should note that, as I'm sure many of the folks on this webinar know, folks who've been involved with the forest community for a long time, the urban forests have kind of been the second-class citizen in the forest community for a long time. You know, throughout that long history of ours that I described, we've been working on urban forests from the very beginning. I'm really proud of that. But it's always felt like an uphill battle to kind of, you know, push for this equal recognition, and maybe that might be encapsulated best by the fact that you know Smokey the Bear and Woodsy the Owl and other famous forest figures, but you probably have never heard of Spunky Squirrel, who was our organization attempted, working with other partners in the forest community, to birth a mascot for urban forests. And Spunky had a brief, illustrious burst of fame for a year or two, and then kind of faded into the dustbin of characters and mascots in history. And I think that's sort of emblematic of the kind of uphill battle that we've often faced to get urban forests the urgent attention that they need. And so, you know, it's an unfortunate reality that climate change has suddenly put urban forests in an entirely new light, an entirely new frame of reference. I want to suggest to you that I think the greatest mistake that we've made in the urban forest movement in the past is allowing ourselves to just make a laundry list of reasons why urban forests are important, and it's such a long list, but by the time you get to the end, you can't even remember where you started, and so all the good things kind of cancel each other out. But also sometimes to just sort of let it lie that, you know, this is scenery for cities, and not really push back forcefully and clearly enough on the reality that urban forests are life and death infrastructure for our cities. And climate change has brought that into relief in an entirely different way. Look, here are just some key indicator numbers. And these are global numbers, but, you know, 94% increase in heat wave days just this century, right? Projected increase in 65 and over, you know, heat mortality by 2050, and only 1/3 of households globally have air conditioning. Those are just a few indicator numbers. One other one that's incredibly powerful is that, you know, there was one study that was attempting to better capture heat-related deaths here in the United States, and found significant undercounting, and suggested that we probably have actually more than 1,200, according to this analysis, heat-related deaths annually in the United States today, and that number could be as nearly 100,000 by the end of this century with the effects of climate change. So we are facing a dire threat in our cities, and we can't just AC our way out of it. That's a really important thing. Sometimes people say, well, it's hot outside, just turn on the air conditioning. Not everybody has air conditioning. Not everyone can afford air conditioning. 25% of low-income households have struggled to pay an energy bill within the last year. And even in many cases, folks have air conditioning. The one on the right isn't equal to the one on the left. If you've got a little window unit in your stuffy, not well heat resistant apartment, you can run that thing hard and it's still not going to be able to cool your place the same as like a central air conditioning unit that you see on the left. So we can't just AC our way through this extreme heat crisis. And AC, by the way, actually makes the problem worse. Air conditioning units take heat from the inside and they put it on the outside. So air conditioning units can increase city temperatures by as much as 1.5 degrees Celsius, according to one study, and are responsible globally for about 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, with projections that that could triple this century as we start to bring air conditioning to more people and run it harder in the face of all this hot weather. So again, if we just try to AC our way out of it, we've got absolutely 0% chance to protect people equitably. And we also, there's no way that we can protect the climate. Our climate cannot handle that additional stress of just trying to run air conditioning as the solution. And that's why we need nature's air conditioning. We need the power of trees. And as you can see from the thermal image on the left, don't take my word for it. There are lots and lots of studies that have captured this, but that picture on the left is worth 1,000 words, that a tree can cool the area underneath by 20 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. The tree is nature's superpowered air conditioning. And there's one study that our organization was part of with some great partners, Georgia Tech and Texas Trees Foundation, that showed that in Dallas, for example, if we reverse the tree loss trend that has been the case in Dallas and combine trees with other cooling surfaces, we could reduce heat-related deaths in Dallas by more than 20%. So when I say this is a life or death solution, I'm super serious about that, and the data really supports that. And of course, that cooling load that the natural cooling that protects you is also energy, again, that you don't have to use to cool your home with air conditioning. And of course, I think you're all probably also familiar with the fact that this air conditioning system for our cities in the form of trees is also an air purification system. And the fact that heat actually cooks air pollution, actually makes air pollution worse, is a very significant factor. What you see on the left here is a picture from the Chicago heat wave of 1995 that killed over 700 people in a 3-day period. And, one of the worst heat events in our nation's history. And there's statistical solid data that shows that the heat-related deaths were higher in low-income areas that had low tree canopy and had therefore, were higher urban heat islands. But also it was the combined stress of air pollution that was being cooked by this extra heat and the heat that was what really made that such a deadly event. You can see the air pollution visually in that picture. So that's a consistent phenomenon. And of course, the same neighborhoods that lack trees and that are hotter are very often places that have higher levels of the constituent pollutants that cause smog. And so there's this double whammy that gets going between heat and air pollution, a negative synergy that trees can actually help on both sides of that equation. We have great research showing that respiratory illness goes down proportionate with the increase in tree cover in communities. So here's the thing. So you add all that together. And so right there, we're suddenly talking about, trees in cities as this absolute top tier frontline solution for helping us slow climate change by providing carbon negative cooling. I mean, this is right. Trees, of course, are sequestering carbon at the same time that they're reducing the cooling load in our communities, but also saving lives. Critically important climate justice issue in terms of protecting people from increasing health threats driven by climate change. And so that makes the profound tree inequities that we have in our communities today. The fact that a map of trees in virtually any community in America is also a map of income, and it's a map of race in ways that transcend income. And so that tree inequity drives health inequity. Trees are a determinant of health in our communities. And just like other determinants of health, if you don't have it in your community, that's going to have a huge impact on your well-being. And we're just better than that as a country. Your zip code should not determine your health. And so we proved it. American Forest, as a service to the movement and the community, created something called Tree Equity Score. We mapped every urban neighborhood in America using a standardized approach, basically looking at where we have trees and where we lack them. And importantly, for you wood wonks out there, it is customized to understand. You're going to have different tree cover in Phoenix versus Boston, for example. So it accounts for the differences of climate and tree potential in a given area. It accounts for the development density of community, those kinds of factors. So it's a localized understanding of a tree target, what kind of tree cover should be in a given neighborhood, and then what's actually there. And then correlated with a range of risk factors and prioritization factors, including income, age, race, health status as measured by the CDC, linguistic isolation, and then the actual temperature differential in a neighborhood down to the decimal point, as I'll show you in a moment. And so at a top line, that gives us the ability to take this tree inequity and put some numbers to it. So nationally, on average, the lowest income neighborhoods in America have 26% less tree cover than the wealthiest neighborhoods and are 7 degrees Fahrenheit hotter. The neighborhoods with the highest concentration of people of color have on average 38% less tree cover and are on average more than 10 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the whitest neighborhoods in America. So this is that really kind of captures for you both the tree inequity that we have and the consequences that it has in terms of heat risk in our communities. So imagine your neighborhood is 92, and perhaps in someone else across town, their neighborhood could be 102. That's the kind of differentials that we're talking about here. And as I'll show you in a moment, it can be far worse. So this is what Tree Equity Score looks like when you zoom into a community. So I'm zoomed in here to the city of Detroit, a place where our organization's been really proud to partner with the city and an amazing group of other organizations I'll speak about in a moment on focused efforts called the Detroit Tree Equity Partnership to work on this issue together at the citywide scale. But I'm zoomed in here on a neighborhood I've actually been to in Southwest Detroit. And as you can see, this neighborhood is 18.2 degrees hotter than the citywide average on the hottest days. 45% people in poverty. So that lets you know a lot of people who might not have air conditioning or are going to struggle to afford air conditioning, have issues with affording healthcare and those kinds of things. A very high health burden as measured by the CDC. So it's really a perfect encapsulation of people who in many cases are facing the greatest health vulnerabilities from extreme heat and air pollution are getting the least protection in the form of trees, and it's making the threats to those people far, far worse. So this kind of data then becomes the roadmap for it's not just sort of a report that goes on a shelf. This is the roadmap for how we're working on tree equity in Detroit, how we're working on tree equity in Phoenix, and how different cities all across the country have just taken this data up organically and started to use it to develop focused tree equity efforts. And one other thing that Tree Equity Score allows you to do, just to, again, give us a chance to go from where we are to where we want to be, is to run a projection and say, hey, well, what would it take to get every neighborhood in our community up to a score of 75? Kind of think about that as kind of like a minimum viable tree cover for protecting people. And you can take that slider bar and you can take it all the way up to, what would it take to get every neighborhood in our city up to a score of 100, up to that optimal tree level that we've identified, that citywide target that we've identified. And at each of these different levels, it calculates the number of trees and then the different environmental benefits and other kinds of benefits, economic benefits that would be created, jobs created, and those kinds of things. So a powerful tool for rallying a community to go from identification of the issue to action. And look, across the country, it's really exciting. There are powerful partnerships in cities, literally in every single corner of this country, where you see the same phenomenon. You see incredible leadership from mayors who have, in some cases, cities that didn't have a single urban and forest employee, who had never really invested substantial city funds in these issues, are making the investment in staffing. They're making the investment in tree related projects and building a workforce. Incredible leadership from frontline organizations. The foundation of the tree equity movement is groups like the Greening of Detroit and so many other incredible frontline organizations, Arizona Sustainability Alliance and others that are out there working with incredible deep roots in the community, engaging community members, bringing a nuanced understanding of what success is going to look like, and really making sure that we're working with communities. And this isn't just something that's happening to communities being driven by top down. Great involvement from the incredible constellation of private sector leaders. Companies like DTE Energy, for example, here in Detroit, incredible participation by private tree care companies and other folks from the private sector side of the tree or of the urban forest community, and so many more. CSR investment from companies like Salesforce and Bank of America and so many others, American Express, who have been just like incredible partners in finding cities and investing in them as partners. And it's really all coming together. And then you have national organizations like American Forests and Arbor Day and so many others that are coming into these partnerships and bringing different kinds of capacities from the national level. When you swirl it all together, all these different kinds of organizations united in a vision around tree equity and working strategically, you can do incredible things. And so what we've seen is there's sort of an approach that's forming that addresses a couple of key questions that we've heard, key issues. One is that we have to do this with people again. And so really getting that community partnership and community engagement part right from the beginning. Not just having that data sit on a shelf, but actually formulating plans that are driven by data and science. And then addressing every aspect of urban forestry. So it's not just about planting trees where they're missing, but it's also about taking care of the trees that are there. Everything right down to urban wood utilization. So building really holistic urban forestry programs to create the tree cover that we need and the tree equity that we need in our communities. And this is the pattern, the approach that we see emerging across the country. We also see a lot of innovation. Kudos to our friends in Phoenix who, as part of their tree equity effort, and Phoenix was the first city in the country to commit to tree equity in every neighborhood by 2030. But Phoenix said, hey, we need to be very precise in the way that we do this. And one of the challenges in Phoenix is just moving around the community, whether you're walking or going to the bus stop or whether you're running or biking, and you want to do that safely in the hotter months. We need to create cool corridors so that we have functional tree equity in the community. And so Phoenix, with help from Arizona State University and other partners, mapped out 100 cool corridors across Phoenix. And you see here some pictures from planting the first one in the Levine neighborhood of South Phoenix. That was just an incredible day. A cool corridor that links together a school, a library, and a park, as well as important public transit stops, and creating a big shade corridor that will make that a totally different experience for users like the school students that you see there on the left coming out of their school. So these are the kinds of innovations that are emerging across the country in the field. There's also a really exciting focus and recognition that if we don't turn this investment in tree equity in our communities into the jobs for people from those communities, there's an injustice in that. Right. There's an opportunity that's being created in addressing this issue, but in so many of the neighborhoods where we're working, the fundamental inequity is economic. And so we have to make sure that if we're going to be making this investment, that we start by creating a ladder of opportunity for people in those neighborhoods to the economic opportunities that we're creating. As American Forest did a study a few years ago, try to capture how big of an economic opportunity is this, and found that we can create 25.7 direct, indirect, and induced jobs for every $1 million that we invest in this work of tree equity. Really exciting opportunity. And so, we've been proud to partner in programs like this. We see other organizations in the urban forest field taking the same approach to build the stepping stones for people to get into those opportunities. Things like pre-employment programs for formerly incarcerated persons to get some transitional training to then be able to enter into really exciting workforce development opportunities in the urban forest field. Different strategies targeted to youth and other ways in which we can not just kind of hope that the people who need these opportunities the most find them, but be very intentional about putting in place the kind of access points and supports that those folks need to get into the field, and then also supports to keep people in the field. Things like wraparound services for folks who take these jobs, so that if someone's car breaks down, it doesn't mean that they have to lose their have to walk away from their job. Other things about, working on the cultural competency and the kind of environment that we're creating for people in these organizations as we transform the workforce and who's participating in these kinds of careers. So it's a really, really exciting moment in the workforce side of this. But we believe really strongly at American Forest that this isn't a just transition if we do not take the incredible investment in tree equity that's occurring and turn it into economic opportunity for the people who need it the most. And speaking of investment, incredible accomplishment, I think, in the Inflation Reduction Act. Senator Booker, who you see there, the man in the middle, worked for 5 long, very hard years. Senator Booker is a former mayor of Newark, New Jersey, and really understood that this issue that we're talking about here is not $1 million problem, it's $1 billion problem. And our country to date has been investing at most $40 million in urban forestry through the Urban and Community Forestry Program of the U.S. Forest Service. Really hasn't been treating this like a serious issue. A rounding area, a fraction of the U.S. Forest Service budget has been going to this issue. And so Senator Booker worked for 5 long years with many great partners. Senator Debbie Stabenow, the chairwoman of the Senate Agriculture Committee in particular, is an amazing leader on this issue and just worked to patiently educate folks and ultimately to secure $1.5 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act that's now rolling out in all 50 states across the country to help cities take that approach that I was describing, every aspect of getting tree equity right, including the workforce piece. And this is flexible funding that is really helping cities and their partners, including new partners like faith-based organizations, to get into this work, to do it better than ever, to do it bigger than ever. And so, America is really showing the world what it looks like to take this issue seriously, invest in it like it matters, and do the work the right way. And I'm proud to say that, in fact, it's been so successful that you now have other countries, the UK and others, that are very actively emulating what we've done here in the US. So I want to close with just one more a bit of optimism from my and our perspective, which is that this incredible tree equity movement that's happening in our cities is also really tied to a larger reforestation movement in America that from our ag lands to our large landscapes, there's this recognition that the more trees kinds of activities are just more of the forest benefits that we need right now. And so I just want to talk a little bit about, some of the broader momentum that we have on reforestation as another example of a reason for optimism. And the first is just to make sure that everyone understands the potential scale of forest climate solutions. I mean, you got to start with the baseline, which is that today, our trees and forests in the United States capture on an annual basis more than 16% of our carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels. That's our trees and forest products all together as a carbon sink capture more than 16% of our carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels. It's a huge contribution to helping us slow climate change. But our forests could do so much more. And reforestation in all of its forms, from urban areas to large landscapes, is one of the most powerful ways to increase the carbon sequestration power of our forests. In fact, this tool, the Reforestation Hub, and you can multitask right now and check this out, something that American Forest developed in partnership with the Nature Conservancy to mobilize some phenomenal analysis that had been led by the Nature Conservancy to do this very sort of wall-to-wall look at what is our reforestation opportunity in the United States in all of its different manifestations, and then calculate what the carbon opportunity might be. This tool also looks at land ownerships. It's very sophisticated in kind of parsing that reforestation opportunity and helping us understand just how big could this be for climate change. And so this analysis, as you can see, found 148 million acres of reforestation opportunity in the United States in all those different forms. And that's just the latest number. We do update this data over time. And that if we were to reforest all of that land, it could increase annual carbon sequestration in U.S. trees and forests by well over half. So that's the scale. So we're at 16% now. That could get us, if we maxed out, we did this full reforestation opportunity, get us to nearly 25% of our current carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels captured by our forests. And that percentage will only grow over time as those emissions decline. But there's also an incredible opportunity as we do that work. So many of those places where that opportunity exists are the same places where we're most rapidly losing biodiversity. So as we lose a tree species like the whitebark pine, which is facing a kind of a perfect storm of stresses and threats, including climate change, Saving that species that's a carbon solution, it's a water solution, it's also a biodiversity solution for species like the grizzly bear and many others that depend on the white bark pine as a critical food source. We can also be strategic in where we focus this reforestation effort to create climate-safe refugia for wildlife. And so one cool example is in Hawaii, where we're building a corridor of forest up Mauna Kea to help songbirds there escape a climate-fueled infusion of malaria-carrying mosquitoes. So these are just a microcosm of the ways in which we can stack these benefits together: carbon, biodiversity, community protection, water supply protection. We can get all those things in the same places, in the same investments, if we're strategic about where we do the work, and we're also strategic about how we do the work. Because we have to design reforestation in the right ways to capture these benefits. You know, in the forestry community, we've come to shorthand this as we have to put the right tree in the right place. Or, you know, some folks have extended that to right tree, right place, right time, and a few other conditions, which is helpful in one sense because it helps people kind of get their head around a complicated idea. But in some ways, it also undersells a little bit the sophistication of the science that's already going into designing reforestation to climate-proof it, for example. And these are a couple of examples of plans that American Forest has developed with agency partners like the U.S. Forest Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, university partners, other nonprofits, all coming together to design reforestation for resilience into the future. Design reforestation for the biodiversity needs that we have, design reforestation for, for carbon capture and for water supply protection, be really strategic about the variables of site preparation and tree species selection and how we're planting trees at this moment in time to make sure that we're not just putting trees back where they've been lost, but we're doing it in a way that we're going to get all those benefits that we need and we're going to sustain them into the future. And there's incredible momentum around building the whole reforestation supply chain. You know, we've had a seed collection and seedling crisis that's been this sort of quiet bottleneck in reforestation for a very, very long time. And it feels like just in the last few years, due to great efforts from different leaders across our community, we've daylighted that shortfall. And now you're seeing, as big reforestation efforts are emerging around the country, they're including equal investment in the seed collection capacity we need, the nursery capacity that we need, so that as we rally interest and support and even resources to do reforestation at bigger scales, we've removed that bottleneck of the supplies that we need to reforest, and the seeds and seedlings that we're using match that kind of climate resilient reforestation planning that I was just speaking about. And for me, one of the most exciting developments of the work's becoming more sophisticated, people are understanding why reforestation is urgent in new ways. I think one of the other things I'm most excited about is the fact that we have a whole new community doing this work. We had to basically build a bigger tent, and which we did through creating the U.S. chapter of 1T.org, an incredible governments to Girl Scouts forest coalition here in the U.S. That is unquestionably the most inclusive forest coalition ever created, and really recognizes the fact that we now have folks who want to do this work from all parts of society, and that we need that. We need the climate movement to be a societal movement. We don't only need Girl Scouts hands involved, for example, but we need the 2.5 million Girl Scouts to go home and talk to other people in their community. We need the alumna, the tens of millions of women who are alumna of the Girl Scouts to learn about this work and be tied into it. All these different aspects of different folks that are touching this work are both getting more done, but they're also helping us create a ripple effect of awareness and interest and support for the forest solutions that we can provide. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about 1T.org US chapter, is just the way in which it's kind of created a home for that new inclusive forest community and starting to ripple out different kinds of leadership across the country. And, you know, I talked about how the work of tree equity is supported by a level of public funding that we've never seen before. This $1.5 billion that I referred to earlier is the largest investment in world history in urban forests. But we have similarly historic public funding going to reforestation writ large as well. Things like the Replant Act, which is the anchor of this $2.5 billion that was provided in the infrastructure package for post-fire reforestation, and so much more. Important dollars in the Inflation Reduction Act that are going to reforestation of large landscapes. And again, super thanks to Senator Debbie Stabenow and her role as the chairwoman of the Agriculture Committee, kind of been the common denominator in so many of these critically important efforts, from the Replant Act to this historic tree equity investment in cities, anchoring all of these big efforts in the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. Thanks to leadership from her and other members of Congress and President Biden's ironclad support for this, we've just got more money to work with from the federal government than we've ever had to do this work and to get the details right. And I should note, lastly, that it does go beyond just reforestation. I've really focused here today on the optimism in what's happening in reforestation. I think that's merited because it is a uniquely powerful pathway for change, and it's one where the things that are happening are uniquely exciting and exemplary, I think, of how to be successful. But there are other great examples all across the forest movement of us scaling up the work, getting it right, new kinds of collaboration, and it touches in all of these different areas that are funded really robustly, and again, in some cases at unprecedented levels, from the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, conserving our forests, wildfire resilience treatments like prescribed fire, climate smart forestry incentives to fine tune how we manage forests so they sequester more carbon, finding new and innovative ways to use wood products as a climate change solution, and so much more. Those things and more are all funded at breakthrough levels in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. And there's amazing work being done in our community by different organizations in all of these spaces. So my final reflections for you are this. Let's lead with the hope. As I said at the beginning, and Tania said this as well, it can be a time where it's really easy to get caught up in what doesn't make you feel hopeful, and what you're worried about, what you're scared of. And I think the world is really looking for things to rally around and to feel hopeful about. And I've had the happy experience so many times of going out and talking to people about the momentum of not just what we're doing, but how we're doing it, the way diverse people are coming together to create solutions in the areas that I talked about. And so let's use that story as a way to kind of bring people in. Second thing is to sharpen the why. I gave the example of tree equity in cities. When we said, hey, urban forests are really important, give us more money, that didn't work very well. When you are able to explain to people why urban forests are a way to save lives and save our climate in the face of climate change, it's really different. When you're able to explain tree inequity to people and the vision of tree equity, it changes the conversation profoundly. And so we have to really, in all aspects of what we're doing, constantly sharpen the why and drive our engagement with that. The data and the science is such an important piece of it. And I really want to acknowledge, when I say science, I don't just mean, traditional Western science and computer generated analyses, but it's how we're braiding indigenous knowledge into the things that I described, such as how we're doing reforestation for resilience. So it's all forms of knowing. Always we use data, powering our work with that. When we have that behind us, the why has more power and we have more credibility. Working holistically, I think, I've often heard people say, well, I'm not sure I can really support this because what about, aren't all the trees going to die? Or are you really paying attention to the details of what's planted where and those kinds of things? And so making sure we're really showing people that we've thought the whole process through in the ways I tried to describe here briefly really makes a difference. And it's also, by the way, how we actually get the work right and get the results that we need on the ground. And get everyone involved. I mean, it's just amazing the way our movement is being transformed by not thinking of the forest movement as the forest sector, but thinking about everyone who cares about these issues, who wants to be involved. And whether you're coming at it because you care about health equity or whether you're coming about it because you care about trees, if we're all working together to turn trees into a solution for our communities to deliver health equity, it's the same outcome. And so we might come to it from different pathways, but part of our challenge is that let's find people and bring them together behind these solutions, wherever they started their journey. And then last, ask for what you really need. The forest community has played scared for a long time with a zero-sum mentality, I think. And in a few of these instances, we just said, let's just ask for what we really need and then go from there. We didn't start from, hey, well, where are we now? And I wonder how much more we could get. We just said, let's just tell the world what we really need. And we need to do that more often. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I'll look forward to the question and answer.
Thank you so much, Jad, for your excellent presentation. All right, so we have a couple of questions that have come into the Q&A. I would encourage any of you to put your questions in, so not into the chat, but directly into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And I am going to actually start us off. Thank you, Jad. Again, it was what I really love about the work that you're doing is that it is data driven, it is common sense and pragmatic, but it is also really inspiring. So that's my favorite combination. So I also appreciated how in the beginning of your presentation, you talked about American forests and your history. We, of course, appreciate that at the Forest History Society. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit more specifically about tree equity and tree inequity. And I mean, again, I think the data you show, when we can look at all kinds of cities and show some of these patterns where there are real disparities in canopy cover and therefore temperatures, air quality, and all those things. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the role that history plays in sort of explaining tree inequity in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. In trying to be concise, which I only partially succeeded at, I think, but you know, I left out some critical details and information, and wow, have some folks in our movement done a tremendous job of capturing that role of history. Jeremy Hoffman, a good a friend down in Richmond, Virginia, has been leading some efforts locally and nationally on, for example, examining the history of redlining. And how, because I mentioned this really important, you know, there's a a really important racial dimension to this that transcends income. You know, and I think it's always important to come back to that because it's just hard for us to hear that, wait a second, even in more affluent communities of color, you know, that you have this tree disparity. And that has been, there's been great research tracing that back to some of the structural inequities that were created in our communities of different kinds of investment, you know, of civic prioritization and so forth, through the pattern of redlining. And so that's one of the reasons why, and really ongoing, I think, power imbalances and biases in the ways that you know, that cities have invested in their communities is absolutely one of the major drivers of that inequity. So you're right. There are, you know, there are, you know, places, you have some cities where, for example, there was a historic die-off of trees, say due to a pest infestation or something that led to a massive loss. And then that became a trigger for, you know, inequities in which parks came back as well. So there are a range of different historical drivers that we could look at, both nationally and then that play out in sort of the unique history of how different cities developed those inequities. But the pattern of it, I think one of the reasons why we wanted to create tree equity score and do it in a wall-to-wall way, as opposed to say, well, hey, let's pick a couple of cities and show what it looks like there, is that it's not as though we had never before noted this inequity, but the problem is we were seeing it one neighborhood or one city at a time. And so it made it easier for people to trivialize and say, oh, well, that's a problem for that city, you know, or as opposed to saying, wait a second, this is a national crisis that has life or death implications. We need a national response. And so I think, so showing the systemic and consistent nature of this inequity was one of really the critical things that spun the difference. And to get to one other thing that I didn't talk about earlier, but I think Mary is it that raised in the question and answer there about the tree species that we plant. One of the slides I painfully left out in trying to be concise was we've worked very hard with our friends at the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science and the U.S. Forest Service around really trying to lean into not just the question of what are the appropriate species right now to plant in a city. So to your question, absolutely are looking at that variable, but also, you know, urban forests, you know, just like we're seeing, for example, wildfire playing out in large landscapes, and people can kind of intuitively understand how that relates to the climate crisis, how climate change is fueling the wildfire crisis. The ways in which climate change is harming our urban forests, I think, are a little more subtle. And so people probably don't think as much about climate smart urban forestry as they think about, wow, what should we be doing out there? And it's equally important. Our trees in cities already have a lot of stresses, right? There's some ways in which cities are actually can create very good growing conditions, but there are other unique challenges that city trees face as well. And so it's kind of doubly important that we're really getting it right in terms of the tree species, the genetics, how they're being planted, how they're being cared for. And so in this work that I described with the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science and the U.S. Forest Service, we've been working on, for example, developing climate-informed species selection guidance, climate and health-informed, I should say, species selection guidance, and then kind of national principles, and then downscaling that for states and localities, so that they can start to apply that kind of forestry strategy to how they're selecting and then caring for their canopy. And I should also note there's some really exciting work. Again, the Forest Service has been a pioneer in this area, and we've been excited to help in thinking about how do we work on cultivating through nurseries species that will be resistant to the kinds of stresses and threats, that trees are facing, particular species are facing in cities as well. So there's sort of the strategy side of it, what do we want to plant, but then it's also about having the right trees to plant. And so I think some really exciting work going on in urban nurseries to align the stock with our resilience needs for the future.
Great. Thank you, and terrific. I want to talk a little bit, or I want to ask you to reflect a little bit more on other aspects that you touch on. You just mentioned the science, and I imagine it's forward-looking as well with anticipated temperature changes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
A few months ago, I think it was late last year, I was at a conference where people were talking about forestry, and the folks who were involved in the tree plan for the city of Cambridge in Massachusetts talked about their plans. And of course, Cambridge is a pretty affluent community, but I was very impressed with the communication strategy that they were using. And they talked about how they have one set of communications for homeowners, one set for renters. They talked about all the kind of community engagement and listening sessions they had done to develop the plan. And you talk about this as well, right? That it isn't just a kind of Washington, D.C. hands it down and people are supposed to do it, but that it really takes engagement. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit more about how you support that work and sort of what you think makes for a successful implementation and deployment, really, of vast funds for doing this work.
Yeah, another one of those slides and things that I didn't linger on in this presentation, but that I actually, when I'm drilling a little deeper, that's one of the things I actually really talk about the most at the most length because of its importance. I think anyone who's ever worked at all in an urban environment to create any kind of change knows, it's complicated. Urban areas are complicated places to create change. There are a lot of stakeholders in a consolidated, environment, and so you really have to start with relationships. You're going to start stepping on people's toes very quickly in an urban area if you don't, because we're all sharing a small physical space and also a kind of a confined cultural and social ecosystem as well. And so getting that engagement right is really critical. And in fact, we published an action guide for community engagement. Loved maybe in follow-up if there's a place to share show notes or something, I'd love to share a link to both the climate and health action guide for forestry that I mentioned earlier, but also this, what, for lack of a better term, we thought of as a community engagement 2.0 a guidance book, trying to reflect on not just cool ideas, but also what have we gotten wrong in the past? And how do we learn from places where, whoa, hey, wait a second, like we clearly didn't get this right by the way that something's landing in a community. And so it's really an effort to try to think all that through. But I think that if I were to summarize what would feel like some of the most important variables, one of them is the timing. That it's one thing to say, oh, well, we figured it all out and then we came and told you, wasn't that great? Like, yeah, we did listening sessions when it wasn't really a listening session, it was a telling session. It's like, that's not the same thing. But if you're bringing people in from the beginning and you're saying, we haven't decided anything yet, let's sit down and let's take a look at this together. That's really different. And so I'm really proud that the partnership that I mentioned in Phoenix with the city of Phoenix and the Heat Ready Phoenix team, I mentioned Arizona Sustainability Alliance, one of my favorite organizations in the country, great great local organization that has been an anchor partner, and others. You know, when we first heard interest from the city of Phoenix and saying, hey, we've got a real heat problem. We know trees could be a big piece of this, but like we're kind of starting a little bit from square one in terms of like what would it really look like to do this right. And so there was a willpower there. You know, the city could have just come out with a big announcement, but they so wisely said, hey, no, we understand how this is supposed to work. And so we all work together. We got over 50 organizations to come together and spend time looking at the tree equity data, talking about what people were seeing in their communities, so that by the time the city, about a year later, made an announcement of this tree equity commitment, which was approved by the city council, you already had the squad was already there, and already bought in. So it wasn't news to anybody, you know, like the groups that were going to drive this forward were already on board. And so I think that just is like that timing issue is such a key one. Even if you're, you know, hey, we've got the data, we've got, you know, so what, you know, like you got to engage with people around that information, so that by the time we're moving, we're really really moving together. And one other thing I'll just say is, you know, everyone's got to get paid. Like, you know, there's a bad, I think, tradition in our movement is saying, well, hey, you know, the large organizations will get paid to do this work and everyone else will volunteer. You know, that's not a just and equitable way for people to engage. And so one of the things that we've been really, you know, working on and advocating for and trying to help make happen ourselves, is to say the frontline organizations that are driving this work forward, they need to be funded at a level that actually reflects the role that they're playing, and that when we do something called tree equity score analyzer, where we actually take that tree equity data, and for certain cities we'll drill it all the way down to the individual property level. But when we bring you know, certain kind of community members in as partners in bringing their local knowledge to that process, we're giving them a stipend to fund them to do that, and recognition that their knowledge and their time is really something of real value. And so I just think as a principle, those are some of the things that really kind of have risen up for us. But again, love to share that community engagement guide as a consolidation of some of the lessons that we've learned as an organization along the way. And I see other organizations across our space. This is not just about American Forest. I see organizations across our space really working in a very different way. You know, that has learned from maybe some things we haven't always gotten right in the past.
Yeah, super important. Thank you. Okay. We have quite a few questions now. So the first question I'm going to take is from Mac McClure. And he wants to know, how do we get truly effective tree ordinances that have major penalties for deforestation for urban/industrial development?
Boy, do I appreciate that question. Thank you for that question. So the 10-step model that if I know everyone didn't memorize the slides that I showed, but there was one slide I showed was how cities are doing it. And I walked through it pretty briefly. But really importantly, one of the steps in that 10-step process, and by the way, we are using that as a blueprint for how we're working with partner cities and working with the community to say, you know, it might not be perfect, but it is at least, it makes sure that we keep it honest and we don't skip steps. And so we kind of lay that down and say, you know, let's make sure we're at least doing all these things. There might be other things we're going to add in or whatever, but these, we feel like you got to do these 10 things and you got to do them in the right order to get this right. And so, you know, with you know, great intentionality, we put the tree protection piece of that, you know, kind of right up front of the forestry side of the equation to say, job number one is to protect the trees that you have, right? These large, amazing, mature trees. And so whether that's really taking a hard look at the ordinances that we have and other regulatory powers that cities have, ways in which cities can protect the trees that they have and impact, you know, both decisions that are made on trees in public spaces, like, you know, hey, we're replacing a sidewalk. Are we just going to cut all the trees down? Or are we going to do it in a way that protects the tree cover? How we're impacting decisions by private landowners and regulating decisions by private landowners. You know, there's sort of just a range of ways in which cities can better protect their tree cover. And so that's, you know, one of those pieces for us in the process is to, with each city, take a look at what's there, look at examples from other cities, to see if a particular community is the tree ordinance side of this, the regulatory side of this, performing the right way, and if not, are there models from other places, carrots or sticks for that matter, that could be helpful. But that's part of the process, is to really examine that tree loss piece of it, and I mean, I think just another sort of dimension of tree loss for me, you know, and for us is, the other side of tree loss is just neglect, like, and you look at in so many communities, for example, the impact of vines, invasive vines taking down really large trees where a modicum of management around that, can save large trees quite consistently. But how well are we sort of thinking about each existing mature tree in a city as this precious resource for all the reasons that I described, and whether it's regulatory and legal protections or whether it's stewardship types of activities that for lack of 15 minutes of of vine cutting can save a tree. Let's mobilize every tool in the box to to protect the canopy that we have, and then let's get really creative. From available planting space to creating planting space if we have to. There's going to have to be some concrete ripped up here if we're going to get this right. How do we also add to that tree canopy? Because there are plenty of places where you just don't have it and have to.
Great. All right. I am going to take you to the next question, which is from Paul Sutter. Thank you, Paul. His question is, if there's any evidence or concern that afforestation in urban neighborhoods creates, I'm not reading this exactly the way it is, afforesting urban neighborhoods experiencing tree inequity leads to gentrification. So does it push out certain groups who have lived there because the neighborhoods become more desirable because of planting of trees?
Yeah, I saw Paul's question in there and I really appreciated it. I'm glad we're going to take that one on because it's really important. It's a question that we get a lot. And let me say, I previously worked for an organization that is very focused on urban park development and has created some of the leading urban parks, I'd say, in the world, actually. A really cool organization. But I think it was very striking. There were some really challenging questions that the organization was grappling with in terms of, we're essentially coming into a neighborhood and building an asset that in some cases doesn't exist in other places. We're actually in some cases like, making this, neighborhood suddenly much more desirable than other places that are more affluent. And so there are some studies, that show that in some cases that has a rapid and measurable impact on gentrification and displacement that can be really hard to manage. And so, so just I want to just start by kind of acknowledging the real importance of saying, making improvements in neighborhoods the way that our cities are operating today, and just with the dynamics, economic and social dynamics that are in place. Anything you do like this, you have to ask the question that Paul's asking. And we have been asking it of ourselves and of the literature in terms of the work of tree equity. And I'm going to give Paul give you a slightly unsatisfying answer, which is, I'd love to tell you I have some contraindicating study that says, oh, there's no effect. We don't have that. We have not found anything that says, oh, there's definitely not an effect. We also haven't found that, signature body of research to suggest that there is a demonstrable and consistent effect. And so we're starting to pick at the hypothesis, and I think it's for us, it's really got to be our next major research investment, is to try to run this hypothesis or run this issue farther to ground. But what's interesting, I think, in what we haven't observed so far in our attempt to understand this issue is the kind of story that I just described, where there's this instant and really broad-based response. And I think the thing is that, and I think the difference is that in this case, we're actually just bringing these neighborhoods up to having the same assets as other neighborhoods have. So it's not giving them an advantage per se, or creating some magnet thing that's bringing people into the neighborhood that's different from other places. It's actually just trying to bring everyone up to the same level of protection in their communities. And that doesn't mean that, trees, we know trees increase, property value. They make a home more desirable aesthetically. As I described, they'll save, money on energy bills. There are all kinds of ways in which trees make homes and make neighborhoods more desirable and more valuable. But the effects seem to be very different, and I think more manageable than some of these other examples of green gentrification that that have triggered a lot of concern. But all to say, it is absolutely something that needs our continued attention. And I think that the most important thing that we can do is having this work led by people in the neighborhoods. So it's not, hey, we came in, we're doing this thing for you. Cross your fingers that that doesn't have a negative impact on you. But we're really saying we're not going to do this work unless we are doing it together, unless we, people in the neighborhood want this investment in their neighborhood. They're part of making the change happen. And I think that just brings a level of collaboration and control to a situation that's really a critical.
Very good question. And thank you for that answer. We have another good question from Mac McClure, and that is about the profession of forestry. So he writes, if we can accelerate urban forestry as a profession, we will automatically have a much better opportunity to make forestry much more diversified and inclusive throughout all communities. I guess it's more of a comment, but that also, I mean, you're talking about different disciplines working together, different people working together. Can you reflect on that a little bit? That seems like a very compelling argument for urban forestry as well.
1,000%. I mean, there are just so many reasons why this is an ideal profession for the issues that we face of the moment. If you think about urban forestry, and of course, I know the kind of audience we have here. This is well known to people. I think I'm guessing many of the folks on the webinar today, but it's a profession with a lot of diverse entry points. You can be someone who's a tree climber and who's out there, directly engaging with trees in a very physical outdoor way. You can be somebody who's working in a computer with data or managing, tree maintenance cycles. So there are more managerial or technology-based aspects of the profession. It's a profession that has incredible small big business incubation capacities. So there are all sorts of folks who are becoming business owners, and that's their way of engaging in this career pathway. And so it just feels both exciting because a lot of people can kind of find their flavor in it, but also I think it makes it accessible. And again, I spoke earlier about our work with formerly incarcerated persons. It's something very important to me personally. I care a lot about, and I feel very intensely in my heart the challenges of good people just facing this barrier to the economy, and so the success stories that we see across the country of organizations. And I want to give again a shout out to our friends at the Greening of Detroit, who I think has done some of the most profound work in this area. Folks who have just been so thoughtful in inventing programs that just give this wonderful on-ramp into this career pathway, and then let people spring off of it in different ways. So if that's just one example of people in our country and in our society who need these kinds of opportunities, and who I think are really well positioned to just take advantage of the diversity of different ways that you can create your own adventure in this field of urban forestry, and for that matter of forestry writ large. I do want to just say one of the most exciting things for myself and for our organization is the growth of young people's interest in forestry, both in cities and rural landscapes. So in California, for example, we partnered with the state of California and the U.S. Forest Service and Service Corps across California to create something called Cone Corps. Because California has one of the biggest backlogs of burned area reforestation need anywhere in the country, and has this massive gap of seeds, and especially the right seeds to grow the right seedlings to reforest all of these burned areas. And so, it wasn't even a matter of money. We just didn't have the people to do this work. And so this Cone Corps has really stepped into this gap, and it's become this entry point for young people some of whom kind of been interested in forestry, but they weren't quite sure how to get into it, or maybe had done a graduate program, but just didn't know how to go to the next step. But also some people who never thought about this. I'm like, hey, that sounds fun. I'm going to try that. And then now we're off on this whole new career pathway that they hadn't even really thought about until they try before you buy with Cone Corps. So I just see this manifestation in so many different ways, and very excited about tribal workforce programs. There's some amazing, cool things tribal organizations are doing around forest restoration and reforestation in particular as a driver of new workforce opportunities, including tribal co-stewardship projects, partnership, for example, with the U.S. Forest Service. So just run around, and just say, where do we need to create opportunity? Where are there barriers to economic opportunity in our country? And this work is something that if we make the right moves, can be an important part of creating economic opportunities that we all deserve.
Thank you. And terrific. I'm so pleased with this excellent webinar. I do hold out a little bit of hope that Spunky the squirrel is going to come back.
You know,
Get into the action.
this whole thing's kind of made me wonder, is there like a free Spunky, or is there like a, you know, Spunky back to, I don't know.
I
We're
think
gonna have to
there's a
have some
lot of
discussions about
potential.
this.
I think so. I think maybe we'll do it offline though. Okay. Well, Jad, thank you so much.